the violence. He says his comments were, quote, totally appropriate.
You're watching News Now from Fox. Now, I'm sure that we all have heard that following Wednesday's riots at the Capitol, big tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, they have all banned President Trump, raising a lot of questions like, are these companies within their legal rights and are they violating the president's freedom of speech? Well, News Now from Fox's Regina Gonzalez sat down with a social media expert on all of the topics. Let's listen in.
Hello, everyone. You're watching News Now from Fox. I'm Regina Gonzalez, and we are continuing to follow the fallout from last week's riots on Capitol Hill as several social media platforms are now banning President Trump's accounts. So we kind of wanted to bring you this segment to talk about, is that even allowed? Joining me right now is Ms. Jasmine Sandler. She is actually a global keynote speaker on social media strategies. Jasmine, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I want to backtrack for a second. Before last week, you know, President Trump has, for the last 4 years, been pretty vocal on Twitter, on social media platforms. So obviously not every president in history was able to use social media. So how really do politicians kind of use social media to go about their daily lives?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. I've been involved with social media and politics since the Million Mom March, which is back in like 2000 and I want to say 4 or 5, you know. It's changed so much, and it's changed with the explosion of social media. So how they use it now is really they're using it on a daily basis to tell their stories. It's almost like they're taking you with them on their campaign trails. And it's very interesting where it's gone. But primarily, social media has been used very effectively by politicians for fundraising and to build loyal audiences. The way that it's being used now is interesting because they are reaching younger voters that aren't even registered, ready to vote yet. So they're kind of cross-posting across all channels to drive influence in a way that's very interesting. And you know, most of the more successful politicians use, you know, live video, for example, every single day. And they're telling their stories and they're inviting people into conversations. And that all has to do with kind of what my practice is a kind of like developing the personal brand, you know. So they're sharing more of their personal side than they used to, and in a way that can be supportive, but in a way it can also be detrimental, as you had mentioned.
And, you know, going off that statement right there, obviously last Wednesday, we watched as our nation's capital was swarmed by pro-Trump supporters, and President Trump did go on Twitter. He made a video telling them to go home. Then in the days leading after, he mentioned, I think his last tweet was the fact that he was not going to be attending President-elect Biden's inauguration before Twitter and several social media platforms decided to suspend his account. So what, first of all, was their reasoning behind this?
Well, I mean, a lot of this has to do with reputation management. You know, I mean, in general, you know, that's the positive of utilizing social media, is you can really use it to protect and build your reputation. But in this case, you know, when it comes to the president being a spokesperson, and when it comes to what he needs to say, you know, in that it's such a rapid form of communication, it's almost like he's apologizing but stepping over his feet at the same time. So unfortunately, I think the message was very unclear, you know, and with a lot of other things that have happened in the last 4 years, as I'm sure you will agree, a lot of this should have been handled sooner. So, you know, his reasoning was he had to do it. He had to say something, right? But I think it wasn't done correctly. And I think that, you know, I don't know, I can't say much about really what's going on at the White House, but I can say that from a reputation management standpoint, you have to have a plan in place. And I think that plan really failed in this case.
Now, a lot of the questions surrounding these social media bans are obviously, we have the First Amendment, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Are these social media bans suspending especially the president of the United States account? Is that allowed? Does this violate the First Amendment?
Yeah, no, it does not violate the First Amendment, because the First Amendment allows censorship when there is reason for so, and specifically around inciting violence. And so, no, it doesn't. And that's why the social networks actually, they have to take action. I mean, these are public companies, that have shareholders and stakeholders, and most of their bigger shareholders are right there. They're the powerful people that run America. So, so it's actually really important, I think, that this sets an example, not just in the United States, but globally, that these things don't spiral and go out of hand and cause physical harm.
A lot of these headlines surfacing say big tech bans. What is big tech? What technology companies make up big tech?
Well, if you start, it's funny that you asked that, because my background's with IBM, right? So I'm a big tech person. But, there's always been a controversy, because I come from IBM. There's constantly kind of been a controversy at how big tech plays a part in the lives of individual citizens, right? So I think the concern, to your question, is that where does the line end between big tech's influence and use by the consumers to cause things that like happened, this past week? So the companies that make up big tech, I mean, primarily what they're talking about is they're talking about Google, right? They're talking about big tech in the form of internet marketing, which is the world that I'm in. These are more about, in big tech here, we're talking about telecommunications. So the big tech companies like Google or, Apple, that's been cited a lot in the last week. Some of these bigger companies that are creating technologies for use by consumers and businesses that can possibly cause negative effects. So they're looking into big tech because they have to, because now there will need to be regulations in big tech that haven't been set forth in the past.
Now, obviously, a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but a lot of question has arisen. Obviously, President Trump can't be the first politician to say such remarks on social media. So, is this really saying something about the views of these companies, do you think, or do you feel like it's more of a safety protocol?
So these companies, they're corporations, right? And I'm an entrepreneur. And so the corporations are, at the end of the day, I mean, first and foremost, they have to be profitable, right? That's what a company is all about. But then they have a very important social responsibility. And social responsibility is a key metric when we look at, in the world of business now, when we look at investing. So it's critical that they hold a strong social responsibility to their shareholders and the general public if they're public companies. So these companies, yes, in one respect, obviously it's safety, but it is part of their overall business mission and vision. And it has to be. Every company that's coming out these days in tech, because I'm kind of involved in the world of investing, they have to have some mark of social responsibility. So you'll see that moving forward in business as you study big tech.
And when you say investing, I actually wanted to bring up the fact that Twitter shares did sink more than 10% following the permanent ban of President Trump's account. So how does social media really coincide with stocks and shareholding?
Just to go back to your point about big tech, big technology is, and I'm not at Merrill Lynch or any more JP Morgan or these companies, but I can tell you that technology is an industry sector that generally does well, and people look to invest in tech. And so they're constantly looking at and monitoring tech companies that are on the rise, right? And there's so much that's gone on with Twitter in the last few years. It's had so many ups and downs. So I think a company like Twitter will be hit harder in terms of, a more deeper impact, like a more of a drop in the stock market that some of the other companies like an Apple that might be more steady. So in any event, the point is that with social media and social media companies, as they have matured, become more appetizing for investors to invest into as part of their portfolios. So again, going back to what I was talking about, any social networks now that are growing or new social networks really need to keep in mind the fact that they're going to go public and they're going to have shareholders and they need to be accountable for what happens.
Some major headlines at the beginning of this week was the fact that Parler was now suspended by Apple, Amazon. First of all, I feel like I've been confused on the platform on what it actually is. What is Parler?
Well, in Parler, I actually did an interview with Refinery 29 a few weeks ago on Parler, and I guess it's ironic what happened, but anyway. So it's really, to me, it's an alternative social network that gives a voice to those people that could be otherwise censored. And if you get into Parler, you kind of take a look at some of the profiles of the influencers there. They're more conservative, right-wing kind of conservative people. So it's giving that sect kind of, if that's the appropriate word, a voice there. And people are, if you've been on Parler, it's more of a free conversation. I wouldn't say that it's been developed for hate speech or to incite riots. I mean, I looked at it pretty deeply, but I think it's just a platform for the people that really feel strongly on that side of the fence, that they can communicate there and they can follow specific people in the media, people like you, well, not like you, but, within the media that tend to skew that way and speak that way, that might be banned from social media or might be, ostracized for what they're saying.
And so Apple, Amazon, Google, they have now all suspended the Parler app. Back to our discussion on the First Amendment, on freedom of speech, all the rules surrounding it. Is this allowed as well, is what I'm really asking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's allowed. The reason why is these apps, they're owned apps. Now, so if you ever developed an app, let's say, and put it in the App Store, just speaking on a very basic level, you have to sign an agreement. And that agreement allows the owner and controller of a platform to allow or disallow content based on their own rules. So, it's definitely allowed. Google Play, Apple Store, if they deem that some content in there could potentially cause harm, they have the rights as owners to shut down that app.
So Parler kind of shot back, and they actually have filed a lawsuit, at least against Amazon, is what we know right now. Going off of what you just said, do they have a case?
I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you that I know the details of Amazon's agreement specifically, because Amazon's a little bit of a different animal, because it's more of a, they have the shopper and it's a different kind of platform. So potentially they could have a case if there's any loopholes in the agreement. I am not really sure, but I can tell you one thing, that the people behind Parler have a very big voice. So they could sway things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, Jasmine, my last question really to you and kind of your take on it. President Trump, as of right now, as we know, is the first U.S. politician to face a lifetime suspension from Twitter. A lot of, politicians and people have voiced that this may send a message to the future of social media. What do you really think that message is?
Well, I think it could be a good message because, social media, I think, unfortunately, and I say this all the time because I've been in it for so long, it was first intended to be a global connection point for people to come together, Secondarily, when they do come together, it's supposed to be used for collective good, right? So unfortunately, social media, especially in the last few years, I can even think 2011, if you remember, when the Egyptian regime was basically stopped through a Twitter revolution, right? So it can be used in ways that can be, make social change and economic change, but sometimes in a very poor way that can cause harm. So I think that this ban can send a good message that, hey, you know what? Social media can be used for commerce, obviously. It can be used to, help raise somebody to a new platform and do good around the world. But, watch out, because it's not meant for you to go out there and incite riots. So in a way, I actually think that this could set a very good example. And I'm thinking globally when I look at it. I'm not just thinking the United States.
Absolutely. Well, Ms. Jasmine Sandler, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up? If people could take one thing away from this interview, what do you want them to know?
Oh, well, I would say, for one thing from the interview is, yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer. I've written a few books on social media, and you know, I'm a big believer that social media can be used for good, and it should be used to bring people together. And I am, you know, specifically very distraught by the divisiveness that social media has, you know, kind of inspired through all of everything that's happened in the last 4 years. So, you know, I would love, I'm only one person, but I would love for people to start thinking about using social media in a better way to, you know, end issues around the world, you know, negative issues. And so I think they really need to think that way. And maybe this all came to a head because we needed a tipping point with everything that's going on, and we needed to look at the use of social media in a different way.
Ms. Jasmine Sandler, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you for joining us on News Now from Fox.
Thank you, Regina. I'm really happy that you contacted me, and I hope to hear from you soon. I look forward to the segment.
Speaking of social media, connect with